My name is Adela Harris, and the day I turned 18, my parents did not buy me a cake. They slid a legal document across the kitchen island and told me to sign away my grandmother's 500-acre estate or pack my bags by midnight. I looked at my father. I picked up the cheap plastic pen and I signed it. For 11 years, I said nothing. I let my family build their high society reputation on a piece of land they thought they owned. But what they did not know was that my signature on that specific piece of paper was the legal equivalent of signing in invisible ink. When their secret debts piled up and they tried to sell my grandmother's legacy to a corporate developer for $6.5 million, they discovered the trap I left for them a decade ago. My father ended up grabbing the plaintiff's table in a courtroom just to keep his knees from buckling. Before I tell you what the judge read out loud to him, welcome to QT Told Stories. Hit like and subscribe if you think family greed should always have consequences, and drop your age and what state you are watching from in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to the night this all started. The midnight ultimatum that set my trap in motion. The kitchen smelled like roasted pecans and vanilla. A fresh pie sat cooling on the granite counter. To anyone driving past our historic home near Mobile, Alabama, it looked like a picture-perfect Southern family celebrating a daughter coming of age. Inside, the air felt cold. My father stood at the head of the island. He did not wear the warm smile he saved for his country club friends. His jaw was set tight. Beside him, my mother rubbed a cloth over a silver serving tray, her eyes studying the metal so she would not have to look at me. My older brother Harrison leaned against the doorframe, holding a glass of sweet tea. He offered a lazy half-smile, waiting for me to break. He was the golden child, the heir apparent to a lifestyle they could not actually afford on their own. "It is just a formality, Adela," my father said. He pushed a manila folder toward me. Inside was a standard quitclaim deed. The printed text transferred all my future rights to Beatrice's Pecan estate directly into my parents' names. I stared at the dotted line. I was 18 as of 3 hours ago. The ink on my birth certificate was barely dry in legal terms, yet they were cornering me in my own home. "And if I need time to read it?" I asked. My voice shook just enough to betray how scared I was. My mother stopped polishing the tray. The silence stretched out. "You do not need time to read it," my father answered. He tapped his finger next to the pen. "You sign it tonight or you pack your bags. You can spend your first night as an adult figuring out how to pay rent." He was not bluffing. They thought I was trapped. They saw an 18-year-old girl staring at the threat of homelessness. What they did not see was the memory playing in my mind. 3 months prior, I had sat in the leather-scented office of Mr. Sterling, Grandma Beatrice's estate lawyer. He had poured me a glass of water, looked me dead in the eye, and warned me this exact moment was coming. "Your father will try to take it," Mr. Sterling had told me. "He will wait until you are legally of age, and he will force your hand. When he does, Adela, do exactly what he asks." I picked up the pen. The plastic felt cold against my fingers. I did not cry. I leaned over the granite and traced my name. My father exhaled a sharp breath and snatched the paper back before I even put the pen down. My mother finally offered a tight, artificial smile. "Good girl," my father said. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving the untouched pie behind. I packed my bags anyway and moved out the next morning. For 11 years, I played the part of the obedient, invisible daughter. I built a quiet life in Birmingham while my family spent a decade flaunting a country club lifestyle built on a ghost document. The reckoning did not start with a judge. It started 11 years later when my sister-in-law showed up on my porch in the pouring rain, holding a secret that meant their house of cards was finally coming down. 11 years is a long time to hold your breath. By the time I turned 29, I had built a life that looked nothing like the artificial world my parents mapped out for me. I lived 3 hours north in Birmingham, working as an agricultural consultant. My days were spent walking soil lines, testing crop yields, and helping real farmers save their family plots. I spent my time with people who knew the actual value of dirt, rain, and hard work. My hands were often calloused, and my boots were usually caked in red Alabama clay. It was a quiet, earned life. I owned my modest home, I paid my bills on time, and I slept soundly at night without worrying about who I needed to impress the next morning. My parents and my older brother Harrison lived in a different reality entirely. Down in Mobile, they had spent the last decade constructing a masterpiece of Southern high society fiction. To the outside world, the Harris family was old money, untouchable and thriving. My mother hosted charity galas, wearing designer dresses that cost more than a reliable used car. She spent her afternoons at exclusive salons, making sure her appearance never betrayed a single flaw. My father maintained his standing at the most expensive country clubs in the county, picking up the tab for local politicians and business leaders, just to ensure his name was spoken with respect in the right circles. Then there was Harrison. The eternal golden child bounced from one prestigious but low-effort job to another, always playing the role of the wealthy heir in waiting. He wore luxury watches and took expensive vacations, projecting an image of financial dominance. They financed this entire theater production on a lie. They used the perceived ownership of Grandma Beatrice's 500-acre pecan estate to secure lines of credit, personal loans, and social capital. Because I signed that quitclaim deed at 18, they believed the property was legally theirs to leverage. They thought the land was their personal banking reserve, waiting to be cashed out whenever they needed a bailout from their reckless spending. I maintained a polite distance. I visited for major holidays, smiled at their jokes, and played the part of the obedient, invisible daughter who had finally learned her place. I never asked for a dime. I never brought up the estate. I just watched. The cracks in their perfect porcelain facade started showing late last summer. It was the 4th of July weekend, and my parents were hosting a lavish barbecue to celebrate the holiday. The humidity hung thick in the air, mixing with the smell of expensive charcoal roasted meats and imported cigars. I sat on the edge of the limestone patio, nursing a glass of iced tea, watching the performance unfold with detached amusement. Harrison arrived an hour late, deliberately ensuring he had an audience for his entrance. He pulled into the circular driveway in a brand-new, custom-lifted luxury truck. The chrome gleamed in the afternoon sun, an obnoxious symbol of newly acquired wealth. He stepped out wearing a crisp linen shirt, tossing the keys to my father with a practiced, arrogant grin. He spent the next 2 hours holding court near the grill, loudly bragging to our uncles and neighbors about his aggressive stock portfolio and his recent commercial real estate investments. My parents beamed with pride. They nodded along, validating every exaggerated claim. They looked at him like he was the undisputed savior of the family name. I watched him take a sip of his bourbon. I noticed his knuckles were white, gripping the glass far too tightly. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, poorly concealed by a fresh summer tan. I noticed the way his wife Chloe stood on the opposite side of the lawn. Chloe was a brilliant, no-nonsense forensic accountant. She rarely spoke at these superficial family gatherings, and that afternoon she stood with her arms crossed, not smiling at all. She looked like a woman watching a slow-motion car crash, bracing for the inevitable impact. The true depth of the illusion became undeniable the very next morning. I had woken up early to head back to Birmingham, but I needed to stop at a local hardware store to pick up some specialized soil testing kits for a client. The store was quiet, smelling of fertilizer and cut pine boards. I was walking down the irrigation aisle when I heard a familiar voice echoing from the checkout registers. It was Harrison. He was not wearing his pressed linen shirt. He wore a faded college hoodie pulled up over his head, and he was arguing in hushed, frantic tones with the teenage cashier. I stepped behind a display of garden hoses, staying out of sight. On the counter sat a modest pile of basic home repair supplies, maybe $50 worth of goods. "Please swipe the chip again," Harrison said. His voice lacked the booming, arrogant confidence from the barbecue. It sounded thin, reedy, and desperate. The cashier sighed and pushed the plastic card into the machine. A sharp negative beep echoed through the quiet store. "Declined again," the cashier said, not looking up from the screen. "That is the third time, sir. Do you have another form of payment?" Harrison patted his pockets, his face turning a dark, mottled red. He muttered a clumsy excuse about a bank fraud alert locking his accounts because he had been traveling so much. The lie was transparent. He grabbed his keys, abandoned the items on the counter, and practically sprinted out the sliding glass doors to escape the humiliation. I watched through the front window as he climbed into his $90,000 luxury truck, a vehicle he clearly leased and could not even afford to put gas in. The contrast was pathetic. The golden child, the supposed stock market genius, could not buy $50 worth of hardware. I drove back to Birmingham with a strange sense of calm settling over me. The math was finally catching up to them. Over the next few weeks, the simmering panic began to bleed into my parents' weekly phone calls. My father started dropping heavy hints about liquidity and shifting assets to maximize returns. He talked about the carrying costs of the Pecan estate like it was a heavy burden he was bravely bearing for the good of our family legacy. He mentioned that the commercial real estate market was hot and that responsible families knew exactly when to liquidate their holdings to secure generational wealth. They were testing the waters. They were trying to see if I would cause a fuss if they moved to sell the land. I gave them nothing to work with. I agreed with whatever my father said, keeping my tone light, agreeable, and entirely submissive. "Yes, Dad, the market is certainly unpredictable. Yes, Dad, you always know what is best for the family portfolio." My compliance emboldened them. They thought they had successfully broken my spirit a decade ago, leaving me too meek to ever question their authority or demand my fair share. They thought the legal runway was clear to cash out Grandma Beatrice's legacy and save themselves from the mountain of hidden debt they had accumulated. They were drowning in loans, credit card balances, and social obligations. And that 500-acre orchard was their only life raft. I knew they were broke. I just did not know how far they would go to hide it, until my sister-in-law showed up at my door in tears, holding a manila envelope that changed everything. The rain came down hard that Tuesday evening, drumming against the metal roof of my Birmingham home. I sat in my living room, reviewing a stack of crop yield reports for a local soybean farmer. The fire was unlit, the house quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the storm outside. When the knock came at my front door, it startled me. Nobody visited unannounced in weather like this, especially not at 9 o'clock at night. I set my paperwork aside, walked through the dimly lit hallway, and unlocked the deadbolt. Standing on my porch was Chloe. She was shivering, her raincoat soaked through, clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest like it was a shield. Chloe had married my brother Harrison 5 years ago. She was a brilliant African-American woman who built her career as a forensic accountant. Sharp, analytical, and uncompromising, she was the only person in the Harris family orbit who actually earned her living. When Harrison first brought her home to Mobile, my parents celebrated the match. They paraded her impressive resume around the country club, treating her success as just another accessory to elevate their own social standing. They assumed she would quietly support Harrison while turning a blind eye to his frequent shortcomings. They assumed wrong. I ushered her inside out of the freezing rain. I took her wet coat, handed her a dry towel, and guided her toward the kitchen. She did not say a word while I boiled water and prepared 2 glasses of sweet tea. The silence between us felt heavy, charged with an unspoken dread. Chloe was not a woman prone to dramatics. She dealt in ledgers, tax codes, and undeniable facts. For her to drive 3 hours up Interstate 65 in the middle of a torrential downpour meant the facts she uncovered were catastrophic. I set the glass of sweet tea in front of her. Chloe sat at my kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the warm glass. She took a slow sip, closing her eyes for a brief second to gather her composure. When she opened them, the raw betrayal in her expression took my breath away. "Harrison lied to me," she whispered. Her voice broke a rare sound from someone who usually commanded every room she entered. "They are selling your legacy to cover his gambling debts." She slid the manila envelope across the smooth wooden surface of my table. I did not reach for it right away. I just listened. Chloe explained that she had noticed discrepancies in their joint checking accounts 3 months ago. Small withdrawals at first, hidden under vague labels like business expenses or consulting fees. But Harrison was married to an auditor. Chloe did what she did best. She dug into the numbers. She bypassed his weak passwords, pulled the hidden credit card statements, and tracked the wire transfers. The reality she uncovered was staggering. Harrison was not a stock market genius. He was a chronic day trader who transitioned into high-stakes sports betting when his investments tanked. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to private creditors. The luxury truck, the expensive watches, the lavish vacations, they were all financed by reckless borrowing. When the creditors started demanding payment, Harrison panicked and went to my parents. Instead of holding him accountable, my father and mother chose to protect their golden child at all costs. They could not let the country club find out their son was a degenerate gambler. They could not let the local politicians know the Harris family was broke. So they decided to liquidate the only asset they thought they had left. I finally opened the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. It was a preliminary sales contract. The buyer was not a local farmer or a conservation group. It was Suncrest Hospitality, a sprawling commercial real estate developer known for paving over historic lands to build luxury resorts. I scanned the pages, reading the cold, clinical language of the agreement. The developer was offering $6.5 million for Grandma Beatrice's 500-acre estate. The money would instantly wipe out Harrison's gambling debts, pay off the secret mortgages my parents had taken out against their own home, and leave them with enough cash to maintain their wealthy facade for another 20 years. But the price of their salvation was the total destruction of the land. Suncrest Hospitality had no interest in harvesting pecans. I turned to the back of the packet and unfolded the blueprints. The century-old orchard, the trees my grandmother planted by hand, the historic wraparound porch where she taught me how to read, all of it was marked for demolition. The developer planned to bulldoze the entire property to construct an 18-hole golf course, a massive hotel complex, and a sprawling paved parking lot. They were going to erase my family history and replace it with concrete. "They signed the letter of intent yesterday," Chloe said. Her tone hardened, the sorrow giving way to a fierce, righteous anger. Harrison thought I would not check the estate LLC documents. He thought I would just stand by and play the loyal wife while he stole your inheritance. He actually believed I would compromise my integrity for his comfort. Chloe looked at me, waiting for the tears to fall. She expected me to break down. She expected the devastated reaction of a younger sister discovering her own flesh and blood had sold her out to save themselves. She had driven through a storm to deliver what she believed was a tragedy. She brought me the blueprints of my own ruin. I ran my fingers over the signature lines on the contract. I saw my father's bold, arrogant handwriting next to the developer's corporate seal. I saw the estimated closing date listed just 30 days away. I read the clauses demanding a clean title transfer. The title company would need to verify ownership before wiring the $6.5 million. They would need to review the old quitclaim deed I signed 11 years ago. The deed my parents used as the foundation for this entire illegal sale. Chloe watched me closely, confusion slowly replacing her anger. I set the blueprints down on the kitchen table and smoothed out the creases. I did not cry. I did not yell. I looked at the developer's contract, and a slow, quiet realization washed over me. I smiled, because the trap my grandmother set was finally about to snap shut. Suncrest Hospitality operated like a ruthless, well-oiled corporate machine. They did not care about the history embedded in the soil. They cared about grading permits, zoning laws, and quarterly profit margins. Within 48 hours of my father signing the initial letter of intent, their contractors were already trespassing on Grandma Beatrice's estate. Men in neon safety vests drove white pickup trucks through the wrought iron gates, planting wooden surveyor stakes into the soft earth. They tied bright pink ribbons around the trunks of century-old pecan trees, marking the exact spots where the wood chippers would soon arrive. Back in Mobile, my family was already mentally spending the payout. My father started browsing glossy brochures for a summer waterfront home in Destin. My mother booked a private consultation for an extravagant kitchen remodel she could not afford. Harrison told his shady private creditors that a major liquidity event was just days away, buying himself a brief window of breathing room from the violent men threatening to collect his gambling debts. My family was celebrating a victory they had not yet secured. They forgot that in commercial real estate, money does not move until the paperwork is bulletproof. Suncrest Hospitality utilized a premier title insurance firm out of Atlanta to handle the closing process. The job of a title underwriter is simple, but entirely unforgiving. They dig through decades of county records to ensure the seller actually owns the land they are trying to liquidate. If there is a single broken link in the chain of ownership, the insurance policy is denied, and the buyer's bank freezes the funds immediately. The underwriter assigned to our family estate was a thorough veteran of the industry. She pulled the property history, tracing the lineage back to my grandmother. Then she arrived at the quitclaim deed filed 11 years ago, the exact deed I signed under the threat of homelessness on the night of my 18th birthday. To an untrained eye, the document looked standard. It had my signature, a date, and a county stamp. But the underwriter was not looking at the surface. She cross-referenced the deed with the specific legal stipulations of Grandma Beatrice's generation-skipping trust. That is when the entire $6.5 million deal hit an impenetrable brick wall. The title officer flagged the document as legally defective. The transfer of ownership was void. The call came to my father while he was standing on the 9th green of his exclusive country club. I can picture the exact moment his fragile world stopped spinning. The escrow officer explained over the phone that the 11-year-old quitclaim lacked the mandatory statutory certifications required to bypass my grandmother's ironclad estate rules. Because those specific legal provisions were never met, my signature on that night carried zero legal weight. The title company flatly refused to issue an insurance policy. Without that policy, Suncrest's corporate lenders locked the escrow account instantly. The $6.5 million was frozen behind a vault of red tape. My father was told the closing process was halted indefinitely. The developer gave him a strict 14-day window to cure the title defect. If he could not produce a new legally binding affidavit signed by me in front of a certified notary, the corporate buyer would terminate the contract. The deal would be dead. Harrison would face his ruthless creditors without a dime to his name. The secret mortgages on my parents' home would default. The pristine Southern reputation they had curated for decades would collapse overnight in a humiliating spectacle of bankruptcy. Panic is a powerful motivator. It strips away pride and exposes pure desperation. For 11 years, my parents treated me like a ghost. I was the obedient, quiet disappointment who lived 3 hours away, only acknowledged during obligatory holiday dinners to keep up appearances. I was the daughter they threw away. Now, by a twist of poetic justice, I was the only human being on earth holding the keys to their salvation. They needed me. They needed the ghost to materialize and sign a fresh piece of paper to save their lives. They just had to figure out how to ask the girl they blackmailed a decade ago to do them an enormous favor. I was walking the perimeter of a peanut farm in rural Shelby County, taking soil samples when my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. The screen displayed my father's name. I did not answer. I let it ring until the automated voice prompted him to leave a message. I stood in the middle of the red dirt field, the wind rustling through the green leaves, and pressed play on the voicemail. "Hey, sweetie." The voice drifting out of my phone speaker was dripping with a forced, sugary southern charm he had not used on me since I was a child in pigtails. "It is your dad. I hope you are having a wonderful week up there in Birmingham. Listen, your mother and I were just talking about how much we miss you. We would love to have you come down for Sunday dinner. Oh, and there is just a tiny paperwork hiccup regarding your grandmother's old property. Nothing to worry your pretty head about, just a quick signature we need your help with to clear up a clerical error at the county office. Give us a call back. We love you." I listened to the recorded message twice. The sheer audacity of calling a $6.5 million frozen asset a tiny paperwork hiccup was almost impressive. He spoke to me like I was a naive child, easily swayed by sweet words and the promise of a warm meal. The irony was palpable. The men and women my parents rubbed shoulders with considered my father a brilliant negotiator, a man of uncompromising strength. Yet here he was, reduced to begging his estranged daughter through a fake, cheerful voicemail. They were relying on my silence. They assumed my distance over the last 11 years was born out of weakness, not strategy. They believed I was oblivious to the developer, oblivious to the mountain of Harrison's gambling debts, and entirely oblivious to the trap Grandma Beatrice had set for them from beyond the grave. They thought I was still that terrified 18-year-old girl. They thought a home-cooked meal and a fake apology would fix a $6.5 million problem. So, I accepted their dinner invitation. The drive from Birmingham to Mobile takes roughly 3.5 hours. I spent the entire journey mentally preparing for the psychological theater I was about to walk into. Pulling up to the wrought iron gates of my parents' estate, the meticulously manicured lawn looked as green and flawless as a magazine cover. Tall oak trees draped in Spanish moss framed the circular driveway, offering a picture-perfect illusion of Southern aristocracy. I parked my modest sedan next to Harrison's ostentatious leased truck. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the sweeping brick steps. My mother opened the mahogany front door before I even had the chance to ring the bell. She wore a tailored silk blouse and a welcoming smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Oh, darling, it is so wonderful to see you," she cooed, pulling me into a stiff embrace. She smelled of expensive floral perfume and underlying anxiety. My father stepped into the foyer right behind her, holding a crystal tumbler of bourbon. He clapped me on the shoulder, radiating a boisterous energy that felt entirely rehearsed. Harrison emerged from the living room, greeting me with a practiced politician-style handshake. "The prodigal sister returns," he joked. His voice carried a hollow ring, the bravado of a man who knew his financial execution was looming just around the corner. They led me into the formal dining room. The space was intimidating, designed to make guests feel small. A grand crystal chandelier hung above a long mahogany table, casting a warm golden glow over the immaculate setting. They had pulled out all the stops. The heavy silver family cutlery gleamed against pristine white linen placemats. My mother had prepared a lavish spread, featuring every single one of my childhood favorite dishes. There was a steaming platter of shrimp and grits, a bowl of perfectly fried green tomatoes, and a basket of warm buttermilk biscuits. It was a culinary weaponization of nostalgia. They were trying to feed me memories of a happy home that had never actually existed. We sat down, and the performance began in earnest. For the first 45 minutes, they played the roles of interested, loving relatives. My father asked polite questions about my agricultural consulting firm, nodding along with feigned fascination as I discussed crop rotation schedules. My mother complimented my hair. Harrison poured my sweet tea, offering charming anecdotes about his supposed real estate ventures. I ate the food, drank the tea, and watched the desperation simmering just beneath their polished surfaces. Every forced laugh and overly enthusiastic nod revealed the terrifying pressure they were under. They were performing for their lives. The $6.5 million corporate bailout hung over the dining table like a suspended guillotine blade. As my mother cleared the dinner plates and brought out a warm peach cobbler, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The casual banter dried up. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his posture, slipping seamlessly from the role of the jovial host into the commanding patriarch. He swirled the remaining amber liquid in his glass, letting a heavy, calculated sigh escape his lips. "Adela," he began, his tone dropping an octave to convey deep paternal wisdom. "We are so proud of the independent life you have built up there in Birmingham. But you know, as we get older, your mother and I think more and more about the Harris legacy. We think about the sacrifices our ancestors made to build a name that commands respect in this community." My mother nodded solemnly, reaching across the table to place her hand over mine. "Family is everything," she murmured softly. "It is the only thing that truly matters when times get tough. We have to protect each other. We have to protect the name." I kept my expression carefully neutral. I let them spin their web of lies, noting every single manipulation tactic. They were invoking a legacy they were actively planning to bulldoze. They were preaching about protecting the family while conspiring to rob me to save Harrison's gambling debts. Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Look, sis, Dad has been working on restructuring some of our legacy assets, making sure everything is secure for the next generation. But we ran into a frustrating little bureaucratic snag regarding Grandma Beatrice's old orchards. Nothing serious, just some outdated zoning language holding up a minor trust transfer." My father chuckled, a dismissive, patronizing sound. "You know how these county clerks are, Adela. They find one misplaced comma from a decade ago, and suddenly everything grinds to a halt. We just need to update the records to reflect the current family structure. It is a simple formality. Just cleaning up the paperwork so we can keep the estate protected." He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and withdrew a neatly folded document. At the exact same moment, my mother removed her hand from mine. Her manicured fingers reached out, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the crisp linen tablecloth in front of me. The movement was sharp, revealing the raw, nervous energy she was struggling to contain. My father placed the paper directly over the smoothed fabric. He clicked a premium fountain pen and laid it carefully next to the document. The silver cutlery glimmered under the chandelier light, creating a stark visual contrast against the dark ink of the legal affidavit. I looked down at the paper. It was not a minor trust transfer. It was a binding, notarized affidavit, stating that I fully and permanently waived any and all rights to Beatrice's estate, past, present, and future. It explicitly cured the defects of the original quitclaim deed I had signed at 18. If my name touched that dotted line, the title company would clear the insurance policy. The developer would wire the $6.5 million. Suncrest Hospitality would bring in the commercial contractors, Harrison would pay off his bookies, and my parents would keep their elite memberships. My family watched me with bated breath. The room fell so silent, I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I traced the edge of the thick paper with my index finger. The texture felt heavy-laden with the weight of their deceit. For a fleeting second, a vivid memory flashed through my mind. I remembered being a little girl, sitting on the sprawling wraparound porch of that very orchard, watching my grandmother shell pecans into a tin bucket. She had told me that roots matter more than the branches. My parents had spent their entire lives polishing the branches, entirely ignoring the rot eating away at their foundation. They were asking me to sign away my heritage to buy them a few more years of fake prestige. The sheer arrogance of their request was staggering. They had not apologized for throwing me out at 18. They had not offered to share a single cent of the developer payout. They simply expected me to fall in line, to be the disposable tool that fixed their catastrophic mistakes. I let the silence stretch. I let them sweat. I could see a bead of perspiration forming near Harrison's hairline. I could see the slight tremor in my mother's manicured fingers as she gripped the edge of the mahogany table. My father's confident smile was beginning to crack at the edges, his eyes silently urging me to just pick up the fountain pen and end their misery. They were so close to salvation they could almost taste it. The millions of dollars were dangling just out of reach, waiting for one stroke of my hand. I looked at the document. Then I looked at my father. I picked up the pen, and then I set it down. "No," I said. And the silence that followed was loud enough to shatter glass. The word "no" hung in the dining room like a physical object. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked 3 distinct times. Nobody blinked. My father stared at me, his charming smile freezing into a grotesque mask. The transition was instantaneous. The warm, inviting Southern patriarch vanished, leaving behind a desperate man staring at financial ruin. He blinked, shaking his head as if he had misheard the single syllable. "Excuse me," he said. The gravel in his voice had returned. The fake, sugary sweetness he used on the phone was gone, replaced by the harsh, commanding tone he used to intimidate his employees and his children. "I said no," I repeated. My tone was flat, unwavering. "I am not signing that paper." The air in the room grew heavy. The smell of the warm peach cobbler, which just moments ago felt nostalgic, now seemed cloying and suffocating. My father pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the polished floorboards, a jarring noise in the quiet house. He planted his hands on the table, leaning his weight forward to loom over me. "You do not get to come into this house, eat my food, and dictate terms to me," he growled. "You will pick up that pen and you will sign it right now." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my posture relaxed. He was trying to summon the terrifying authority he wielded 11 years ago. Back then, a raised voice from him sent me packing my bags in the middle of the night. Back then, his disapproval felt like a death sentence, but I was no longer a frightened teenager with nowhere to go. I was a grown woman. I had a career testing soil across Alabama farms. I owned my own home. I had a clear understanding of exactly what this legal document meant and exactly how much power I held. I looked at the dark ink on the page. I knew the corporate developers at Suncrest Hospitality were waiting. I knew the title company underwriters were waiting. "You cannot force a signature twice, Dad," I said calmly. "It did not work the first time. It certainly will not work tonight." His face flushed a deep, ugly red. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched collar. "We gave you everything," he shouted. "We clothed you. We put a roof over your head. We raised you to respect your elders. You owe this family. You owe us your loyalty." My mother abandoned her role as the graceful peacemaker. The elegant hostess evaporated, revealing the bitter, status-obsessed woman underneath. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white under the pressure. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed. The venom in her voice stripped away decades of country club etiquette. "You have always been jealous of your brother. You have always resented the beautiful life we built. You come back here just to spite us. You want to see Harrison destroyed because you could never achieve what he has." I looked at her tailored silk blouse and her perfect salon-styled hair. She was projecting her own superficial values onto me. She equated success with leased luxury vehicles and country club memberships. I did not care about Harrison's expensive watches or his fake real estate ventures. I cared about the 500 acres of pecan trees my grandmother nurtured with her own hands. I cared about the rich Alabama soil they were trying to pave over with concrete just to save their fragile social standing. "Harrison did this to himself, Mom," I said. "I did not force him to gamble away money he did not have. I did not force you to take out secret mortgages to cover his tracks. I did not force any of you to live beyond your means. You chose to fund a lie. Now the bill is due, and I am not paying it." The truth hit them like a physical blow. The mention of the gambling debts and the secret mortgages meant the charade was over. They realized I knew everything. I knew about the $6.5 million developer contract. I knew about the frozen escrow account. I knew about their impending bankruptcy, Harrison snapped. The golden child facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. The reality of his private creditors and his mounting debts crashed over him all at once. He stood up so fast, his heavy dining chair tipped backward, slamming into the ornate wooden wainscoting behind him. He slammed his fist onto the dining table. The heavy silver cutlery rattled against the fine porcelain plates. "Sign the document, Adela," he yelled. His voice cracked with raw panic, stripping away his polished politician persona. "You do not understand what is at stake here. You do not know the people I owe money to. They do not care about legal technicalities. They want their cash." As he lurched forward across the table to point a trembling finger at me, his arm caught his crystal water goblet. The heavy glass tipped, plunging off the edge of the mahogany table. It shattered against the expensive hardwood floor. Water splashed across the polished wood, and chunks of fine crystal scattered in every direction. Ice cubes skittered across the floorboards, sliding under the antique buffet cabinet. The sharp sound echoed through the high ceilings, a physical manifestation of their breaking reality. Harrison stood breathing heavily, staring at the mess he made. The perfect dining room was ruined. The illusion of control was gone. They were three terrified adults standing amidst broken glass, demanding salvation from the daughter they had discarded. I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt, moving with deliberate slowness. My calm demeanor only fueled their rage. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer any insults. I just looked at the three of them, committing this pathetic moment to memory. They had built their entire identities on the perception of power, but in the face of a simple refusal, they crumbled into desperate, angry children. "Grandma Beatrice knew exactly who you were," I said. My voice carried easily across the quiet room. "That is why she protected the estate. She knew you would try to sell our history to the highest bidder the moment things got tough. She knew you valued cash over legacy." I pushed my chair in, leaving the unsigned affidavit sitting next to the premium fountain pen on the white linen placemat. The $6.5 million lifeline remained out of their reach, untouched and legally useless. "If you walk out that door, you are no longer part of this family," my father roared. His face was a mask of pure fury. "We will cut you off forever. You will never set foot in this house again." I paused near the threshold of the dining room. I turned and looked at him one last time. "You cut me off 11 years ago, Dad," I said. "I am just making it official." I turned my back on them and walked out of the formal dining room. I stepped carefully over the shattered crystal and melting ice cubes, leaving the ruins of their dinner party behind. I let myself out the mahogany front door, stepping into the warm, humid Alabama night air. The crickets chirped softly in the distance, a stark contrast to the screaming I had just left behind. I walked down the sweeping brick steps, got into my modest sedan, and started the engine. As I drove away from the wrought iron gates, I watched their pristine, heavily mortgaged mansion shrink in my rearview mirror. The physical and emotional ties were severed. I had set a hard boundary, reclaiming the power they stole from me when I was a teenager. By refusing to sign the affidavit, I left them paralyzed. They could not move forward with the corporate sale, and they could not access the funds needed to satisfy their creditors. The trap had closed. I thought walking out would give them time to realize they were beaten. I underestimated their greed, because by the next morning, my parents launched a war that would drag the entire town into our living room. In the South, a reputation is a tangible currency. It takes generations of careful cultivation to build, and only a few whispered conversations to destroy. When my parents realized their legal threats held zero weight inside that shattered dining room, they immediately pivoted to the only battlefield they still controlled. They waged a social war. By Monday morning, a calculated whispering campaign had already infected our extended family tree and their exclusive circles. My father did not waste time. He treated gossip the same way he treated a corporate negotiation, striking first to command the narrative. He called his brothers his golfing partners and the prominent deacons at their church. My mother activated her network of charity committee chairs and salon acquaintances. The story they spun was a masterpiece of victimhood. They painted me as a deeply unstable, bitter woman who had returned from Birmingham for the sole purpose of stealing Harrison's rightful inheritance out of pure, unadulterated spite. According to their revised history, my agricultural consulting career was a total failure. I was allegedly struggling to keep my head above water, and I was trying to hold my grandmother's historic estate hostage just to extort my own flesh and blood. They framed the $6.5 million developer deal as a noble, desperate effort to save the family land from my supposed financial ruin. The lie was brilliant because it preyed upon the foundational values of our community. In our culture, respecting the patriarch and protecting the family name are unwritten laws. By positioning me as the villain, they turned their impending bankruptcy into a heroic story of parental sacrifice. The ripple effect was swift. My phone started buzzing Tuesday afternoon. Cousins I used to catch fireflies with during long summer nights suddenly unfriended me on social media. My inbox began filling with unsolicited emails from distant relatives. They sent links to scriptures about forgiveness and wrote long paragraphs lecturing me on the importance of honoring my mother and father. Nobody asked for my side of the story. They simply accepted the word of the wealthy, charismatic patriarch over the quiet daughter who had moved away a decade ago. The true depth of the ostracization hit me 2 days later. I was shopping for fresh produce at a local market in a quiet Birmingham suburb. I turned the corner into the floral aisle and found myself standing face to face with my Aunt Loretta. She was my father's oldest sister, a woman whose approval dictated the social hierarchy of our entire extended family. She wore her signature pearl necklace and held a basket of organic peaches. I stopped my shopping cart, offering a polite greeting. "Hello, Aunt Loretta," I said. "I hope you are doing well." She did not reply. Her eyes swept over me, cold and piercing, carrying the kind of deep, generational judgment reserved for outcasts. She did not raise her voice or cause a public scene. She did something far worse. She deliberately turned her head away, pivoted her cart on the polished linoleum floor, and walked in the opposite direction, pretending I did not exist. The dismissal was total and suffocating. I stood alone in the aisle, my hands gripping the metal handle of my cart. 10 minutes later, as I loaded my groceries into the trunk of my sedan, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from her number. It contained a single devastating sentence. "You should be ashamed of what you are doing to your poor mother." I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the glowing screen. A familiar weight pressed down on my chest. This was the exact psychological pressure cooker my parents relied upon. They were weaponizing isolation. In a community where your worth is defined by your ties being cast out, is meant to feel like a social death sentence. They expected the shame to crush my spirit. They believed the pain of rejection would wear me down until I drove back to Mobile, knocked on their mahogany front door, and signed the legal affidavit just to earn back a fraction of their conditional love. 11 years ago, that strategy would have worked flawlessly. The younger version of me would have crumbled under the weight of Aunt Loretta's glare. But the woman sitting in that car had spent a decade building a foundation on solid rock, not fragile social standing. I turned off my phone screen, put the car in drive, and went back to work. I navigated the pain of being socially exiled by leaning into the quiet strength I inherited from Grandma Beatrice. She always told me that truth does not need a megaphone because lies eventually run out of breath. I let my relatives whisper. I let them send their judgmental texts. I refused to waste a single ounce of energy trying to defend myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. More importantly, my parents made a critical miscalculation. They thought cutting me off from the family network would leave me blind and defenseless. They did not know I had a secret lifeline operating directly inside their own mansion. Chloe and I communicated through a secure encrypted messaging application. While my mother was busy crying fake tears at her tennis club, and my father was playing the stoic victim at the golf course, Chloe was documenting their downfall in real time. She sent me brief, factual updates late at night when Harrison was asleep. Her messages were a stark contrast to the emotional warfare my parents were waging. Chloe dealt strictly in data, numbers, and undeniable evidence. Through her covert updates, I learned that the corporate developer had officially issued a breach of contract warning. The title company refused to budge on the defective quitclaim deed. Suncrest Hospitality gave my father exactly 10 days to produce my notarized signature before they walked away from the $6.5 million purchase and sued him for holding up the commercial project. The tension inside my parents' house was reaching a boiling point. Harrison was drinking heavily, terrified of the private creditors who were growing increasingly impatient with his empty promises. My father was burning through his remaining lines of credit just to keep the country club dues paid, desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth while the foundation crumbled beneath his feet. He was a cornered animal, running out of options and running out of time. Chloe served as my eyes and ears, a silent guardian, analyzing every desperate move they made. She was the moral compass they lacked, a woman who valued integrity over leased luxury vehicles and fake prestige. My parents spent all their energy trying to destroy my reputation hundreds of miles away. The gossip was meant to break me, but while they were busy whispering to the neighbors, they forgot to watch their own backyard. And Chloe was done playing nice. While my parents dedicated their waking hours to ruining my reputation across Alabama high society, they neglected the quiet storm gathering inside their own walls. Chloe did not operate on emotion. She operated on evidence. As a forensic accountant, her entire career revolved around finding the hidden truth buried beneath layers of corporate deceit. She knew that people lie, but numbers always tell the story. For 3 consecutive nights, while Harrison slept off his liquor in the master bedroom, Chloe sat at his heavy oak desk in the study downstairs. She bypassed his weak passwords. She dug past the surface-level credit card debt and the empty bank accounts. What she found was a secondary layer of financial betrayal so deep it bordered on the absurd. Harrison had not just borrowed money from shady private creditors, he had actively leveraged the physical assets of Grandma Beatrice's estate. The 500-acre property was not just raw land, it was a fully functional agricultural operation before my parents let it fall into disrepair. The storage barns housed millions of dollars worth of specialized farming equipment. There were commercial tree shakers, industrial pecan sorters, heavy-duty tractors, and state-of-the-art irrigation pumps. Harrison had quietly taken out high-interest collateral loans against every single piece of that heavy machinery. He forged documents claiming he was the sole legal owner of the equipment, using the cash to fund a frantic series of catastrophic day trades and offshore sports bets. He was trying to win back his losses, chasing a phantom jackpot that never materialized. Instead, he committed felony commercial fraud. Chloe printed every ledger, every wire transfer receipt, and every fraudulent loan application. She organized the documents into neat, undeniable stacks. She did not yell. She did not throw things. She simply waited for Friday evening. Harrison returned to the estate around 6 o'clock. He walked up the grand staircase, his tie loosened, carrying the lingering scent of stale bourbon and cheap cologne. He expected to find his wife getting ready for another tedious country club dinner. Instead, he opened the double doors to the master bedroom and stopped dead in his tracks. Chloe stood near the foot of their king-sized bed. 2 large designer suitcases lay open on the mattress. She was meticulously folding a silk blouse, placing it next to a neat stack of tailored business suits. The room was deathly quiet. The printouts from his home office rested on the glass coffee table near the window, squared away in a pristine manila folder. "What is going on?" Harrison asked. His voice carried a fake, nervous chuckle. "Are we going somewhere?" "I am going back to Atlanta," Chloe said. She did not look up from the suitcase. She picked up a leather toiletry bag and tucked it into the corner of the luggage. "You are staying here." Harrison stepped further into the room, his charming facade flickering. "Honey, let us not do this right now. I know things have been stressful lately, with my sister acting crazy and the real estate deal taking longer than expected, but we are right on the finish line. We just need to hold on a little longer." Chloe finally stopped packing. She turned to face him. Her expression was devoid of any affection. It was the clinical, calculating look of an auditor staring at a bankrupt client. She pointed a steady finger toward the glass table. "I went through your study, Harrison," she said. "I found the collateral loans. I found the equipment financing. I tracked the wire transfers to the offshore betting accounts. I know exactly what you did. You used agricultural machinery you do not own to steal money you cannot repay." The color drained from Harrison's face. The charming smile vanished, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed stare of a cornered animal. He took a step backward, bumping into the doorframe. He opened his mouth to formulate an excuse to spin another elaborate lie, but the words died in his throat. The hard evidence was sitting right in front of him. Chloe zipped up her suitcase. The sharp metallic sound sliced through the heavy silence of the bedroom. "You thought you married a trophy," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, stripping away his last shred of dignity. "You forgot you married an auditor." Harrison crumbled. The golden child, the arrogant heir who spent a decade parading around Mobile as a titan of industry, dropped to his knees. He grabbed the edge of the mattress, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He begged her. He pleaded for her to stay, promising he would change, swearing that the developer payout would erase the debt and make them whole again. He offered empty vows wrapped in desperate tears. Chloe looked down at him with nothing but pity. She picked up the manila folder from the glass table and tapped it against her palm. "I am leaving tonight," she told him, "and I am giving you a choice. You have 48 hours to walk into the district attorney's office and confess to the equipment fraud. You tell them everything. If you do not turn yourself in by Monday morning, I will hand these files directly to Adelia's lawyer. I will testify against you in open court. Do not doubt me, Harrison. I will not let you drag my reputation down into a prison cell with you." She grabbed the handles of her luggage and walked past him without a second glance. Harrison remained on the floor, weeping into the expensive duvet cover as the sound of her footsteps faded down the grand staircase. The front door clicked shut. An engine started in the driveway, tires crunching against the gravel as Chloe drove away, severing her ties to the toxic illusion of the Harris family. Her departure sent a shockwave through the mansion. Harrison stumbled downstairs, hyperventilating, clutching the folder of evidence. He found my parents in the study, reviewing their dwindling bank statements. When he dropped the papers onto my father's desk and confessed to the secondary fraud, the remaining pillars of their pristine world collapsed. My mother let out a sharp, breathless sob, burying her face in her hands. The reality of her son's criminal behavior shattered her carefully curated delusion. There was no spinning this at the country club. There was no blaming an ungrateful daughter in Birmingham. The golden child was facing hard prison time. My father sat in his leather chair, staring at the financial ledgers. His hands shook. The family dynamics were permanently broken. Their inner circle, the tight-knit alliance they relied upon to intimidate everyone else, had dissolved. Chloe had acted as the moral compass they lacked, proving that real loyalty is anchored in integrity, not blood. By walking out the door, she stripped away their final layer of defense. They were isolated, exposed, and running out of time. The corporate buyers from Suncrest Hospitality were demanding the title clearance. The private creditors were circling Harrison. The district attorney threat loomed like a dark cloud over the weekend. The pressure was unbearable, twisting my father's mind until rational thought gave way to sheer, unadulterated panic. He was a man accustomed to winning, a man who believed the rules of society did not apply to his tax bracket. He realized that emotional manipulation and social smear campaigns were useless against the cold, hard mechanics of the law. If he could not convince me to sign the affidavit, he had to find another way to force the $6.5 million deal through escrow. He needed the cash to pay off the fraudulent equipment loans before Chloe exposed his son. He needed the cash to save his mansion. With Chloe gone and the corporate buyer threatening to pull out of the multi-million-dollar deal, my father crossed a legal line he could never uncross. He picked up a pen that did not belong to him. The clock in the downstairs study ticked with the rhythm of a slow countdown. It was Saturday morning, just hours after Chloe had driven away from the estate, taking the last shred of the family dignity with her. Sunlight streamed through the expensive plantation shutters, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. My father sat alone behind his heavy oak desk. His tie hung loose around his collar, and his eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night spent staring into the abyss of his own making. On the leather blotter in front of him sat the blank legal affidavit. It was the same piece of paper I had refused to sign, the same document I had left sitting on the formal dining room table next to his premium fountain pen. He had retrieved it after I drove away, smoothing out the pristine edges, treating it like a holy relic. That single sheet of paper represented salvation. It represented the $6.5 million payout from Suncrest Hospitality, the erasure of Harrison's hidden equipment loans, and the preservation of their country club dynasty. Without my signature, that paper was worthless. Without my signature, his golden child was going to prison, and his historic mansion was going into foreclosure. Desperation is a strange catalyst. It possesses the unique ability to rewrite a person's moral code in a matter of hours. My father had spent his entire life lecturing other people about honor tradition and doing the right thing. He prided himself on being a pillar of the Alabama business community. But as he stared at the blank signature line, the impending ruin stripped away his polished exterior, revealing the raw, calculating survivalist underneath. He did not view the situation as a consequence of his own greed. In his twisted reality, he was the victim. He convinced himself that I was being unreasonable, that I was a stubborn, bitter daughter, unfairly withholding what rightfully belonged to the patriarch of the family. He rationalized the next step as a necessary evil, a temporary transgression required to protect his bloodline. He was not committing a crime. He was simply correcting an administrative oversight. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a stack of old cardboard boxes. Inside were remnants of my childhood. High school yearbooks, old permission slips, and faded birthday cards. He spread them out across the mahogany surface, searching for clear examples of my handwriting. He found a college application I had filled out a decade earlier. He placed it next to the blank legal affidavit. My father picked up his fountain pen. He took a piece of scrap paper and began to trace the letters of my name. His first few attempts were rigid and unnatural. The loops were too tight, the angles too sharp. He adjusted his grip, letting his wrist loosen, practicing the fluid motion of my signature. He filled 3 entire sheets of scrap paper with my forged name, over and over again, until the muscle memory began to settle into his hand. When he felt confident, he pulled the actual legal document to the center of the blotter. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He lowered the pen and let the dark ink flow across the dotted line. He forged my signature with a chilling precision, executing a felony in the quiet comfort of his own study. But a signature alone was not enough to satisfy the relentless underwriters at the title company. The document required a certified notary seal to prove I had signed it in person, presenting valid identification. My father could not walk into a legitimate bank or law firm to secure the stamp. He needed someone operating in the shadows, someone whose moral compass was as broken as his own. He made a phone call to a man named Vernon Davis. Vernon was a disgraced former real estate broker who lost his commercial license years ago due to mingling client funds. He now operated out of a decaying, windowless office tucked behind a bail bondsman shop on the outskirts of Mobile. Vernon managed to keep his notary commission active, leveraging it to scrape together a miserable living by authenticating questionable paperwork for desperate people. My father drove to that dingy strip mall on Saturday afternoon. He parked his pristine luxury sedan far away from the entrance, ashamed to be seen in such a dilapidated neighborhood. He walked into the humid, poorly lit office carrying a leather briefcase. Vernon sat behind a cheap laminate desk, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and cheap peppermint. The contrast between the two men was stark. My father wore tailored Italian wool, projecting an aura of elite superiority. Vernon wore a stained dress shirt, projecting nothing but exhaustion. Yet, in the eyes of the law, they were now exact equals. They were both common thieves. My father did not waste time with pleasantries. He pulled the forged affidavit from his briefcase and laid it flat on the laminate desk. He did not explain the origin of the document. He did not mention my name or the $6.5 million corporate deal. He simply reached into his coat pocket, withdrew a thick envelope stuffed with $2,000 in untraceable cash, and placed it next to the paperwork. Vernon looked at the envelope. He looked at the forged signature. He knew exactly what he was being asked to do. A bead of sweat formed on his receding hairline. He hesitated, weighing the risk of losing his freedom against the immediate gratification of a heavy payday. The silence in the cramped office stretched out suffocating and tense. Then Vernon reached for the envelope. He slid the cash into his top drawer and pulled out his official embosser. He pressed the tool down onto the corner of the affidavit. The harsh mechanical clack of the notary stamp hitting the fraudulent paper echoed through the small room, sealing a felony into the public record. My father drove back to the estate with the authenticated document resting on his passenger seat. He felt an overwhelming rush of euphoria. The burden of impending bankruptcy lifted from his shoulders. He truly believed he had outsmarted the system, outsmarted the corporate lawyers, and outsmarted his own daughter. On Monday morning, he scanned the forged document and emailed it directly to the title insurance underwriter in Atlanta. He spent the next 3 hours pacing the floor of his study, waiting for the corporate machine to process his lie. Shortly before noon, the email notification chimed on his computer. The escrow officer accepted the affidavit at face value. The title defect was officially cured. The green light was given to release the $6.5 million wire transfer by the end of the week. The atmosphere inside the mansion transformed instantly. The suffocating dread vanished, replaced by a manic, arrogant joy. Harrison wept tears of relief, knowing the offshore bookies would finally be paid. My mother immediately picked up the phone, ordering extravagant floral arrangements for the foyer and booking her luxury kitchen remodel. My father poured stiff drinks for everyone, basking in the glow of his own twisted heroism. They had stared into the abyss, and they had survived. They popped champagne that night, thinking they had won. But my lawyer, Mr. Sterling, gets alerts whenever a deed is filed under my name. And when he called me the next morning, we did not just plan a lawsuit. We planned an execution. Mr. Sterling called me at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. Estate lawyers do not make phone calls at dawn unless the ground has shifted beneath your feet. He did not bother with pleasantries or small talk. He informed me that an affidavit bearing my signature had just been recorded with the county clerk. The title defect was officially cured. The corporate escrow account was unfrozen. The commercial developer was preparing to wire $6.5 million to my family by the end of the business week. I sat at my kitchen table, watching my morning coffee turn cold. I had not signed anything. The realization settled over me with a chilling, crystalline clarity. My father had not just bullied me in his dining room. He had not just lied to his country club friends to save face. He had crossed the unforgiving threshold into felony forgery. He forged my name to steal an inheritance he could not secure through emotional intimidation. I drove straight to the law office. Mr. Sterling was a veteran attorney who had drafted Grandma Beatrice's original trust. He possessed a sharp legal mind and a deep distaste for arrogant men who thought wealth exempted them from the law. We pulled the recorded document from the county database. Looking at the dark ink on the page, I felt a strange sense of detachment. The signature was a clever imitation, mirroring the general shape of my handwriting, but it lacked my natural rhythm. Below it sat the seal of a disgraced local notary. My father was sloppy. Desperation makes people careless. We did not just prepare a simple objection to halt the sale. We assembled a legal execution. Mr. Sterling drafted a quiet title lawsuit to freeze the property transfer permanently. He added a civil fraud complaint naming my father, Harrison, and the notary as co-conspirators. To finalize the trap, we secured an emergency temporary restraining order. This mandate prevented my family from stepping foot on the orchard, liquidating any estate assets, or contacting the corporate developer. We also dispatched an emergency courier to the title insurance firm in Atlanta, providing them with a sworn declaration that the signature they had just approved was an illegal forgery. The escrow account was slammed shut, locking the $6.5 million out of reach once again. The next question was how to deliver the news. In the legal world, process servers usually catch people at home or in the quiet confines of an office building. But Mr. Sterling understood Southern high society just as well as he understood jurisprudence. He knew my father was hosting his annual extravagant tailgate at the upcoming Auburn University football game. It was the most important Saturday of the year, the Iron Bowl. For my parents, this tailgate was not just a party. It was a vital networking event where they entertained wealthy potential investors, local politicians, and commercial banking executives. They used these high-stakes game day events to secure bridge loans and maintain their elite facade. Striking them in private would allow my father to spin the narrative to hide the lawsuit from his peers and to quietly negotiate a settlement. Striking him in public would sever his financial lifelines instantly. Saturday arrived with crisp autumn air, the kind of perfect football weather that turns college campuses into sprawling, high-energy festivals. Auburn tailgates are legendary events, steeped in deep-rooted football culture. Beneath the shade of historic oak trees, with the towering grandstands of the stadium looming in the background, the elite alumni gathered to celebrate. The air was thick with the scent of smoked brisket, bourbon-glazed pecans, and anticipation. My parents had erected a colossal white tent in the premium alumni section. This was not a standard folding table setup. They had rented ornate crystal chandeliers to hang from the canvas canopy. Caterers in crisp white uniforms served gourmet hors d'oeuvres on polished silver platters. My father wore a tailored sports coat in the university colors, holding court by the premium open bar. He exuded an aura of supreme confidence, believing the real estate millions were already secured in his bank account. My mother floated through the dense crowd, performing the role of the gracious, unflappable hostess. Because it was the Iron Bowl rivalry game, she was engaging in strategic diplomacy. She was currently chatting with a prominent commercial banker from Tuscaloosa, a man whose firm my father desperately needed for a future line of credit. To appease her guest, she held a red and white crimson shaker, a polite nod to the opposing Alabama team. She was laughing at a shared joke, her manicured fingers twirling the plastic handle. The process server we hired did not look like a typical legal courier. Mr. Sterling retained a man who looked exactly like an affluent alumni donor. He wore a crisp polo shirt, tailored slacks, and a pair of expensive sunglasses. He blended seamlessly into the crowd of high-net-worth individuals. He bypassed the caterers, ignoring the trays of shrimp cocktail, and walked directly toward the center of the tent. My father was in the middle of pitching a new, entirely fictitious real estate venture to a circle of silent partners. He was using his hands to emphasize the projected returns, his voice booming over the ambient noise of the marching bands and the clinking cocktail glasses. The server approached him without hesitation. He did not pull my father aside. He did not lower his voice to offer a discreet warning. He spoke with a clear, projecting tone designed to carry across the entire tent. "Are you Arthur Harris?" the server asked. My father stopped mid-sentence. Assuming this was another wealthy introduction orchestrated by a mutual friend, he offered a broad, welcoming smile. "I am," he said, reaching out to shake the man's hand. The server did not take his hand. Instead, he reached inside his tailored jacket and withdrew a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. He slapped the papers directly against my father's chest, forcing him to catch them before they hit the ground. "You have been served," the man declared loudly. The words echoed under the white canvas canopy, slicing through the festive atmosphere like a blade. The conversations in the immediate vicinity stopped instantly. Heads turned. My mother stopped laughing. The color drained from her cheeks as her eyes locked onto the thick stack of legal papers. The red and white crimson shaker dropped from her manicured hand. It fell through the tense air and landed with a sharp splash in a puddle of spilled beer on the pavement. The process server turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the sea of tailgaters. My father stood frozen in place, his welcoming smile contorted into a mask of pure shock. He looked down at the documents resting in his hands. The wealthy potential investors standing in his circle leaned in, their eyes scanning the bold black text printed on the front page. Civil fraud, quiet title, restraining order. The pristine social facade my parents had spent decades meticulously building disintegrated in a matter of seconds. The investors exchanged highly uncomfortable glances. In the world of high finance, a civil fraud lawsuit is a contagious disease. Nobody wanted to be caught standing near the infected host. In the South, a man is only as good as his word and his credit line. My father had just been publicly branded a fraud in front of the very men who controlled the local economy. The silent partners did not wait for an explanation. They knew that in business, where there is smoke, there is usually a devastating fire. One by one, they muttered quick excuses. They set their expensive drinks down on the catered tables and quietly exited the tent, distancing themselves from the radioactive scandal unfolding before their eyes. My mother stood paralyzed next to the Tuscaloosa banker, unable to muster a single word of Southern charm to salvage the situation. The banker checked his watch, offered a tight nod, and walked away, taking my father's last hope for a bridge loan with him. The extravagant crystal chandeliers suddenly looked ridiculous hanging over an empty party. The gourmet food sat untouched. Harrison, who had been bragging to a group of friends near the edge of the tent, realized what had just happened. He quickly retreated toward the parking lot, fleeing the humiliation and leaving his parents alone to face the wreckage. The physical isolation of my father standing in the center of his lavish, deserted tent mirrored the financial isolation he was about to experience. My father stared at the papers, his face drained of color. But the civil suit was just the appetizer. The real nightmare for him was waiting in the deposition room. The fallout from the tailgate ambush was immediate and brutal. The civil fraud lawsuit effectively severed my father's access to the local commercial banking network. When you are publicly served with a restraining order regarding a $6.5 million property dispute, your credit rating evaporates. But the legal process is not swift. It requires a meticulous gathering of evidence before a judge ever hears the case. This phase is called discovery, and the crown jewel of discovery is the deposition. A deposition is not a casual conversation. It is sworn testimony given under the penalty of perjury, recorded by a court reporter and often filmed. It is a sterile, unforgiving environment where arrogant people often talk themselves into a prison cell. We scheduled the depositions for a Tuesday morning in late October. The setting was the expansive conference room of Mr. Sterling's law firm in downtown Mobile. The room was dominated by a massive mahogany table. Large windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, but the atmosphere inside felt claustrophobic. I sat quietly next to Mr. Sterling, holding a legal pad. Across the table sat my parents Harrison and their hastily retained defense attorney. Their lawyer looked exhausted. He was a mid-level litigator who had clearly spent the last month trying to manage 3 clients who believed they were smarter than the legal system. My father wore a sharp, dark suit, projecting the same manufactured confidence he used at the country club. My mother sat rigid, her posture perfect, clutching a designer handbag. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms with a smug, dismissive smirk. They still believed they could bully their way out of the trap. They thought this was just another negotiation, a temporary hurdle before they secured the corporate payout. Mr. Sterling began the questioning with my father. For the first 2 hours, my father performed brilliantly. He was charismatic, evading direct questions with long, winding stories about family tradition and the burdens of managing a historic estate. He painted himself as the benevolent patriarch, struggling to manage a difficult, emotionally unstable daughter. When Mr. Sterling finally pivoted to the events of my 18th birthday, my father leaned forward, looking directly into the video camera. "I remember that evening perfectly," my father testified, his voice smooth and earnest. Adela came to us. She was overwhelmed by the prospect of inheriting such a massive responsibility at a young age. She willingly signed the quitclaim deed. We did not force her. We simply accepted her decision to pass the burden to us, ensuring the land remained protected within the family structure. He lied without breaking a sweat. It was a terrifying display of sociopathic grace. Mr. Sterling did not interrupt. He let my father weave his web of perjury, allowing him to stack one lie on top of another until the narrative was entirely dependent on his fabricated version of history. Then, the line of questioning shifted to the recent forged affidavit. "And this new document," Mr. Sterling asked, sliding a copy of the forgery across the mahogany table. "The one submitted to the title company last month. You maintain that your daughter signed this in your presence." "Absolutely," my father replied without hesitation. "We had a lovely Sunday dinner." She recognized that the original quitclaim deed needed a minor clerical correction, and she signed the new affidavit right there in our formal dining room. Harrison let out a soft, mocking chuckle, shifting his weight in the leather chair. The smugness radiated from him. He believed they had successfully buried the truth. He thought it was simply their word against mine, and in Mobile, the word of Arthur Harris usually carried more weight than a quiet agricultural consultant. They relied on gaslighting. They thought they could manipulate the legal record the same way they manipulated our extended family. But Mr. Sterling did not deal in emotions or social standing. He dealt in cold, hard facts, and he had allowed them to dig their graves deep enough that they could never climb out. Mr. Sterling paused, adjusting his reading glasses. He opened a thick manila folder resting in front of him. "Let us return to the night of your daughter's 18th birthday," he said quietly. "You testified that she willingly surrendered her inheritance." "That is correct," my father stated, his tone dripping with condescension. Mr. Sterling withdrew a single sheet of paper from the folder. It was old, the edges slightly yellowed, bearing the unmistakable seal of my grandmother's estate trust. He slid it across the long table. It stopped directly in front of my father. "Are you familiar with the Beatrice Harris Generation-Skipping Trust?" Mr. Sterling asked. My father's confident smile faltered. He looked down at the document. "Yes," he answered slowly. "The original trust that governed the property before Adela transferred it to me." Mr. Sterling picked up a duplicate copy. "I direct your attention to Section 4, Paragraph B, Subclause 3. Please read it aloud for the record." The defense attorney leaned in, his eyes scanning the text. He audibly gasped. My father cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. He started to read, but his voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. He stopped. "Please continue, Mr. Harris," Mr. Sterling prompted, his voice carrying the authority of a judge. My father swallowed hard. Any beneficiary under the age of 25, he read, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, who attempts to transfer, waive, or alter their rights to the estate must first obtain a certificate of independent legal advice. This certificate must be signed by a neutral attorney verifying the beneficiary is acting without duress or familial coercion. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The smug, triumphant smirk vanished from Harrison's face instantly. My mother gripped her designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles turned bone white. My grandmother was a brilliant, pragmatic woman. She knew my parents were obsessed with status. She knew they would view the orchard as a personal piggy bank. She anticipated that the moment I turned 18, they would ambush me, using their parental authority to steal my legacy. So she built an ironclad anti-duress provision directly into the trust. It was a legal tripwire designed specifically to paralyze them. Without that independent certificate, the quitclaim deed I signed on my 18th birthday was not just defective, it was legally void from the exact moment the ink dried. It possessed zero legal standing. It was a ghost. And you never obtained this certificate, did you? Mr. Sterling asked. My father stared at the yellowed paper. He could not speak. The realization of his colossal mistake crashed over him. For 11 years, he had operated under the delusion that he owned a 500-acre estate. He had taken out secret mortgages, secured personal lines of credit, and negotiated a $6.5 million commercial sale, all based on a piece of paper that was entirely worthless. But the trap did not end there, because if the original quitclaim deed was void, that meant the title company defect was legitimate. And if the defect was legitimate, it meant the only way to push the corporate sale through was to forge my signature on the new affidavit. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany table. By admitting under oath that you believed the original quitclaim was valid, you established your motive for the recent forgery. You needed a clean title, and you ran out of time. The defense attorney immediately threw up his hands. "We need a recess," he shouted, standing up from his chair. "We are stopping this deposition right now." But the damage was already done. The perjury was recorded. The motive for felony forgery was established. My father looked at the trust document, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled against the table. He looked at me, realizing for the first time that I was not his victim. I was his judge, and court was officially in session. The Mobile County Courthouse stood as a monolith of limestone and dark oak in the center of the city. Walking through the heavy double doors felt like crossing the threshold into a different realm. Outside those walls, my parents controlled the narrative. They used country club gossip and social intimidation to dictate reality. Inside Courtroom 4, the narrative was controlled entirely by the rule of law. Judge Thornton presided over the bench. He was a veteran Alabama magistrate with decades of experience handling complex estate disputes. He possessed a reputation for enforcing property statutes with clinical precision and holding zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He did not care about elite networking or legacy families. He cared about the chain of title. We sat at the plaintiff table on the left side of the room. Mr. Sterling arranged his case files with slow, deliberate movements. Across the center aisle, my family looked remarkably fragile. The country club arrogance had evaporated. It was replaced by a restless, twitching anxiety. Harrison kept checking his expensive watch, his leg bouncing up and down beneath the table. My mother stared straight ahead at the polished wood paneling, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. My father whispered frantically to their exhausted defense attorney, his face flushed with panicked energy. The gallery behind us sat mostly empty. The only spectators were two junior partners representing Suncrest Hospitality. The corporate developers sent them to observe the proceedings and determine if their multi-million-dollar resort project still had a pulse. They sat in the back row, taking meticulous notes. Judge Thornton called the room to order. He asked for the opening arguments regarding our quiet title action. Mr. Sterling stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. He did not deliver an impassioned plea about a stolen childhood or a broken family. He treated the courtroom like a university lecture hall, and the subject was fundamental property law. He presented the original deed to the 500-acre pecan orchard, tracing the legal ownership back to Grandma Beatrice. He explained how she intentionally bypassed her own son when she drafted her final wishes. She placed the estate into a generation-skipping trust, naming me as the sole eventual beneficiary. The defense attorney attempted to interrupt the presentation. He argued that the restrictive trust was permanently superseded by the quitclaim deed I signed on the night of my 18th birthday. He claimed that signature transferred all rights and dissolved my grandmother's stipulations. Judge Thornton instructed the defense counsel to sit down and allow the plaintiff to finish laying out the timeline. Mr. Sterling projected a digital copy of the trust agreement onto the large screen facing the bench. He highlighted Section 4 of the text. He read the anti-duress provision aloud for the court record. He explained the mandatory legal requirement for a certificate of independent legal advice. Any beneficiary under the age of 25 needed this specific certificate to prove they were acting without familial coercion before they could alter their inheritance. Mr. Sterling turned to face my father. He asked the defense to produce this certificate. The courtroom grew incredibly quiet. The hum of the air conditioning unit became the loudest sound in the room. My father shifted uncomfortably in his heavy wooden chair. His defense attorney stammered, shuffling through a stack of disorganized papers. The lawyer offered a weak, meandering argument about customary family agreements. He claimed that verbal consent was given, arguing that the independent certificate requirement was merely an outdated administrative formality. Judge Thornton did not look amused. Property law in the state of Alabama does not operate on informal family agreements or implied consent, the judge stated. His voice was deep and resonant. It operates on documented statutory compliance. Mr. Sterling drove the final nail into the coffin of their defense. He explained that because the certificate was never obtained, the quitclaim deed lacked the fundamental statutory requirements for execution. It was an invalid legal instrument. From the moment the ink dried 11 years ago, the document held the exact same legal weight as a blank sheet of notebook paper. The cascading effects of that single fact were devastating. It meant my parents never owned the historic estate. They never possessed the legal right to use the farming equipment as collateral for high-interest loans. They never held the authority to negotiate a commercial sale with Suncrest Hospitality. Every line of credit, every social boast, and every financial maneuver they executed over the past decade was built on a foundation of thin air. The reality of their situation washed over the defense table like a freezing tidal wave. Harrison dropped his head into his hands, the remaining fight draining out of his posture. The offshore bookies were going to collect their debts, and he had no shield left to hide behind. His leased luxury truck and his fake real estate ventures were about to vanish. My mother pressed her manicured fingers against her lips, stifling a soft sob. Her pristine social standing was officially a matter of public failure. She realized she would never host another charity gala or step foot inside the elite salon again. The elite society she worshipped was going to excommunicate her by sunset. My father gripped the edge of the oak defense table. His knuckles turned stark white. He refused to accept defeat. He tried to speak over his own lawyer. He tried to explain that he had paid the property taxes for 11 years. He argued that he had maintained the physical boundaries of the land. He claimed he was the rightful patriarch and deserved the equity he had preserved. Judge Thornton interrupted his frantic rambling. The heavy, deafening rustle of the judge's black robes echoed through the quiet room as he leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses to glare down at the defendant's table. "You cannot build legal equity on a void deed, Mr. Harris," the judge said sternly. "You operated under a false premise of your own making. Ignorance of trust law does not grant you ownership. My father pointed a trembling finger across the aisle at me. He launched into a desperate, unhinged tirade. He claimed I was manipulating the judicial system. He insisted that even if the first quitclaim deed was technically flawed, I had recently rectified the mistake. He commanded his exhausted lawyer to present the new affidavit, the one filed just weeks ago to cure the title defect and secure the developer payout. The defense attorney hesitated. He sensed the impending danger radiating from our side of the room. But my father demanded the paper be entered into consideration, believing it was his final trump card. He thought the authenticated notary seal would force the court to validate the multi-million-dollar sale. He pushed the paper toward the center aisle. My parents tried to argue. They tried to play the victim, but the judge raised his hand, silencing the courtroom. He had noticed the second document, the forged one, and his expression turned to pure ice. Judge Thornton sat motionless on the elevated bench. He stared down at the piece of paper the defense attorney had just pushed forward. The courtroom held a tense, suffocating quiet. My father sat tall in his wooden chair, adjusting his silk tie. He projected the image of a man who had just played a winning hand in a high-stakes game. He truly believed this single sheet of paper would force the judicial system to validate his illegal real estate deal. He thought the dark ink and the official-looking notary stamp formed an impenetrable shield against any consequence. Mr. Sterling did not object right away. He allowed the arrogant silence to settle over the room. He let my father savor the illusion of victory for just a few seconds longer. Then, Mr. Sterling picked up a thin manila folder from our table and walked slowly toward the center aisle. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling said, his voice steady and clinical, "the plaintiff requests permission to submit Exhibit D for the court's immediate review." The judge offered a brief nod. Mr. Sterling approached the clerk and handed over a certified copy of my Alabama driver's license, my state voter registration card, and a recent tax return. All three documents contained my verified legal signature. We had prepared these exhibits weeks in advance, anticipating my father's desperate move. Judge Thornton accepted the files. He placed the forged affidavits side by side with the verified documents under the bright, sterile light of his desk lamp. He leaned forward, peering over the rim of his reading glasses. The scrutiny was intense. My father's confident smirk began to fade. The silence stretched out thick and heavy, wrapping around the defense table like a tightening coil. The discrepancies were not subtle. My natural signature flows with a specific relaxed cadence. The loops carry a natural momentum. The signature my father traced was rigid. The ink was pressed far too hard into the paper, indicating hesitation. The angles were unnatural. It was the desperate imitation of a man trying to copy a shape he did not fundamentally understand. Judge Thornton possessed decades of experience analyzing fraudulent documents. It took him less than 30 seconds to recognize the deception. The judge looked up, his eyes locked directly onto my father. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Counselor," the judge said, addressing my parents, exhausted defense attorney, "did you personally verify the origin of this document before submitting it into evidence today?" The defense lawyer swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously against his collar. He sensed the impending legal disaster. "My client provided the affidavit, Your Honor," the lawyer replied, his voice trembling slightly. "He assured me it was executed properly. It bears a certified notary seal." Mr. Sterling stepped forward again. "About that seal, Your Honor," he said, "the stamp belongs to a man named Vernon Davis. We took the liberty of contacting the Alabama Secretary of State this morning." Mr. Sterling handed a final piece of paper to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. Vernon Davis had his notary commission permanently revoked 3 years ago for mingling client funds, Mr. Sterling explained. "The stamp on that affidavit is fraudulent. The man who wielded it possesses no legal authority in this state. The seal is just as fake as the signature above it." The realization crashed over the defense table. My father had not just submitted a questionable business contract, he had entered a forged document into a court of law. He had committed perjury under oath forgery and attempted commercial real estate fraud, all within the span of a single judicial proceeding. He brought a criminal conspiracy into a civil courtroom, and he handed the evidence directly to the magistrate. The civil property dispute instantly morphed into a criminal issue. The two junior partners representing Suncrest Hospitality had been sitting quietly in the back row of the gallery. They were sent by their corporate bosses to monitor a routine, quiet title hearing. They expected a boring administrative delay. Instead, they had front-row seats to a felony in progress. Corporate developers deal in risk assessment. There is no acceptable risk margin for criminal fraud. A title insurance firm will never underwrite a property entangled in a federal forgery investigation. The lead partner did not say a single word. He simply closed his leather portfolio with a sharp, definitive snap. He tapped his colleague on the shoulder. Both men stood up, turned their backs on the proceedings, and walked briskly up the center aisle. They pushed through the heavy wooden double doors of the courtroom. The sound of those doors clicking shut echoed like a final heartbeat. The $6.5 million corporate bailout vanished in real time. My parents' financial salvation walked right out into the mobile hallway and disappeared forever. The loss of the developer meant the loss of everything. The secret mortgages my parents took out on their mansion would default within weeks. The country club dues would go unpaid. The high society prestige they worshipped was reduced to dust. But the financial ruin was no longer their primary concern. They realized they had not just lost the money, they had lost their freedom. Harrison realized the gravity of the situation a fraction of a second before my parents did. His offshore bookies were still waiting. His dangerous private creditors were still demanding payment. And now his father was caught committing a felony on the public record, rendering the inheritance entirely void. The instinct for pure self-preservation kicked in. Harrison shifted his weight abruptly. The sharp, panicked squeak of his wooden chair pierced the quiet courtroom as he instinctively tried to physically distance himself from his parents at the defense table. He slid his chair several inches away, his body language screaming that he wanted no part of the sinking ship. My mother noticed the movement. She looked at her golden child, the son she had sacrificed everything to protect, the son whose gambling debts started this entire nightmare. She watched him recoil from her as if she were carrying a plague. The family dynamic imploded right there in the courtroom. There was no loyalty. There was only panic. The defense attorney immediately gathered his legal pads and took a deliberate step away from my father. He addressed the bench, his voice frantic. "Your Honor, I had no prior knowledge regarding the fraudulent nature of this document. I formally request to withdraw as counsel for the defense, effective immediately." Judge Thornton ignored the attorney. His gaze remained fixed on my father, who was now hyperventilating. The polished, charismatic patriarch of the Harris family was gone. In his place sat a terrified, broken man, staring at the consequences of his own arrogance. The layers of conflict crashed together simultaneously. The financial ruin, the familial betrayal, and the impending criminal charges all collided in a perfect storm of their own making. The developer walked out. The money was gone. But the judge was not finished. He picked up his gavel, looked directly at my father, and read a ruling that would strip him of everything he thought he owned. Judge Thornton picked up his wooden gavel, but did not strike the sounding block. He did not need to make a loud noise to command the room. The sheer weight of his silent glare anchored everyone in their seats. He looked at the forged affidavit, then at the certified state documents Mr. Sterling had provided, and finally at my father. The Alabama magistrate was a man who dedicated his career to upholding the integrity of the judicial system. He viewed the submission of fraudulent evidence not just as a desperate tactic, but as a direct insult to his courtroom. The defense attorney had requested to withdraw, but the judge ignored the plea. He instructed the lawyer to remain seated until the proceedings concluded. My father stood frozen behind the defense table. The tailored sports coat he wore to the Auburn football tailgate now hung awkwardly on his frame, as if the man inside the expensive fabric had suddenly shrunk. "I am prepared to issue my ruling on the quiet title action," Judge Thornton announced. His voice echoed off the polished limestone walls, steady and devoid of any sympathy. "Based on the evidence presented today, including the explicit stipulations within the Beatrice Harris Generation Skipping Trust, it is the finding of this court that the quitclaim deed signed 11 years ago is legally void. It was executed without the mandatory certificate of independent legal advice. Therefore, the transfer of ownership never occurred." The judge paused, allowing the reality of the statement to settle over the defense table. The 500-acre pecan orchard, along with all associated agricultural equipment, outbuildings, and mineral rights, belongs solely to the plaintiff, Adela Harris. The title is hereby cleared of any and all encumbrances placed upon it by the defendants. The defendants possess no legal claim, no equity, and no right of possession. My grandmother's legacy was finally safe. The sprawling estate, the trees she nurtured, and the historic porch where she taught me to read were legally returned to my hands. The corporate developer was gone, and the threat of bulldozers paving over our history was erased. But the ruling was far from over. In a civil dispute, the losing party is often required to absorb the financial burden of the litigation, especially when they act in bad faith. Judge Thornton looked down at his notes. Furthermore, the judge continued, "Due to the egregious and deceptive nature of the defendant's actions throughout this process, I am awarding the plaintiff full legal fees and court costs. The defendants will be held jointly liable for the financial restitution of Mr. Sterling's firm." My mother closed her eyes, a quiet gasp escaping her throat. They were already drowning in hidden mortgages and maxed-out credit lines. They possessed zero liquidity. Now they were legally mandated to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to the very lawyer who had just dismantled their lives. It was an inescapable debt. If they failed to pay, the court would authorize the seizure of their remaining personal assets, including the pristine mobile mansion they worshipped. Yet the financial ruin was merely the prologue to the true catastrophe. Judge Thornton reached out and picked up the forged affidavit. He held the document up by the corner, treating it like a piece of hazardous material. "The civil matters are resolved," the judge stated, his tone shifting from administrative to punitive. However, this court cannot ignore the presentation of fraudulent evidence. Submitting a document with a forged signature and an invalid notary seal is a direct violation of the Penal Code. It constitutes a deliberate attempt to defraud the court, the title insurance firm, and the plaintiff. He turned to the court clerk sitting below the bench. "Madam Clerk, you are instructed to impound Exhibit D immediately. You will forward the physical document along with the certified transcripts of today's deposition and trial testimony directly to the Mobile County District Attorney." The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. "I am formally referring Arthur Harris and Vernon Davis for criminal investigation," the judge declared. "The recommended charges will include uttering a forged instrument, perjury under oath, and felony real estate fraud." The impact of the criminal referral struck the defense table with devastating physical force. The visceral image of my father in that exact second is burned into my memory permanently. He reached out and physically grabbed the edge of the heavy oak plaintiff's table. His fingers dug into the polished wood. His knuckles turned stark white under the intense pressure. He was gripping the timber just to keep his knees from buckling under the crushing weight of the ruling. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. His chest heaved beneath his starched shirt. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life controlling his environment, dictating terms to his family, and projecting an aura of untouchable wealth. In a matter of minutes, a man in a black robe had stripped away his money, his property, his reputation, and his impending freedom. He was going to face a grand jury. He was going to face prison time. Beside him, Harrison remained pressed against the far edge of his chair. The golden child did not reach out to steady his father. He did not offer a single word of comfort. Harrison was paralyzed by his own cowardice, entirely focused on how quickly he could distance himself from the sinking ship. His offshore bookies were waiting, and the protective umbrella of his father's wealth had just evaporated. He was an adult who had never learned how to survive without a bailout, and the bailout was gone forever. My mother stared blankly at the floorboards. The pristine socialite was dead. The reality of becoming a social pariah, combined with the terrifying prospect of her husband going to a federal penitentiary, shattered her delicate psyche. She had enabled his greed for decades, valuing country club prestige over the well-being of her own daughter. Now she was left to navigate the wreckage alone. I sat next to Mr. Sterling and watched their world collapse. I searched my own heart for a trace of pity, a lingering shred of familial sympathy for the people who shared my blood. I found nothing. There was no sadness. There was no overwhelming surge of joyful vindication either. There was only a profound, grounding relief. For 11 years, I carried the burden of their midnight ultimatum. I remembered the cold granite of the kitchen island, the cheap plastic pen, and the threat of homelessness hanging over my 18th birthday. I had spent a decade building an honest life with my hands in the Alabama dirt, waiting for the inevitable moment their lies would catch up to them. Justice is rarely swift, but when it finally arrives, it is absolute. Judge Thornton struck his wooden gavel against the sounding block. The sharp crack signaled the end of the proceedings. "Court is adjourned," he announced, standing up and exiting through the private chamber door. The bailiff moved toward the defense table to ensure an orderly exit. My father could not stand on his own. His defense attorney, eager to escape the toxic fallout, hastily gathered his briefcases and practically ran up the center aisle. Harrison stood up, avoiding eye contact with everyone, and walked swiftly out the heavy double doors, leaving his parents behind. My mother eventually placed her hand under my father's elbow, helping him find his balance. They shuffled up the aisle together. They looked broken, aged, and hollowed out. They passed my table, but neither of them turned to look at me. The arrogance that defined their existence had been eradicated by the harsh light of the law. They walked out of the courthouse with nothing, no money, no property, and soon no freedom. But for me, the story was not over. I had one last trip to make. 2 weeks after the gavel fell in Judge Thornton's courtroom, I drove down County Road 9. The autumn air carried the crisp chill of late November. The wrought iron gates marking the entrance to Grandma Beatrice's estate stood closed, chained together, just as they had been since the temporary restraining order was issued months ago. I did not need a security code or a gate attendant. I held the heavy brass key Mr. Sterling had handed me earlier that morning. I stepped out of my sedan, unlocked the thick padlock, and pushed the iron gates open with my own hands. The rust on the old hinges squeaked a metallic sound of dormant history, finally waking up. Driving up the long dirt lane, the 500 acres stretched out before me. My parents had deeply neglected the land. They treated the orchard as a static bank vault rather than a living, breathing ecosystem. Dead branches littered the symmetrical rows. The irrigation lines were cracked from years of disuse, and the soil looked thirsty and pale. But stepping out of my car and walking into the center of the grove, I felt the undeniable pulse of the earth beneath my boots. The soil was rich and dark, holding decades of untapped potential. It was my soil now. The physical possession of the land felt like breathing clean air for the first time in my adult life. Back in Mobile, the wheels of justice ground forward with merciless precision. The district attorney did not offer my father a quiet plea deal to save his country club reputation. The grand jury handed down a multi-count indictment for felony forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perjury under oath. The local newspapers, the same publications that used to feature my mother in their Sunday Society pages, published my father's mugshot on the front page for the entire city to see. The prominent Tuscaloosa bankers, the charity board members, and the elite politicians severed all ties overnight. Without the corporate buyout from Suncrest Hospitality to act as a shield, the secret mortgages defaulted almost immediately. The bank foreclosed on their pristine mansion. The moving trucks arrived on a Tuesday morning, supervised by the county sheriff, to ensure no assets tied to the fraud investigation were hidden or sold. My parents were forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a modest rental property on the industrial outskirts of the city. They drained their last remaining dollars to retain a criminal defense attorney who could only hope to negotiate a reduced prison sentence. Harrison fared even worse. The protective shield of our father's wealth dissolved, leaving him exposed to the ruthless private creditors he had defrauded. The luxury truck was repossessed from his driveway in the middle of the night. His tailored suits were sold to consignment shops to cover his basic living expenses. Without his charming facade or his phantom real estate ventures, the golden child was reduced to his actual skill set, which was nothing. He currently lives in a cheap one-bedroom apartment complex near the interstate. He works a grueling hourly wage job at a distribution warehouse just to keep the offshore bookies from hunting him down. He tried to call me once. I recognized the unfamiliar number and answered against my better judgment. He wept over the line, begging for a small loan from the estate revenues to settle his remaining debts. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a lecture on morality. I simply hung up the phone and permanently blocked the number. The social war my parents launched against me ended in a total, humiliating surrender. The tight-knit Alabama community that had eagerly ostracized me suddenly developed collective amnesia. The same aunts, uncles, and church deacons who sent me judgmental text messages about honoring my family were now dead silent. The truth of the forged affidavit and the criminal trials spread through the gossip circles like wildfire. Aunt Loretta, the woman who deliberately turned her shopping cart around to avoid me in the grocery store, actually mailed me a handwritten apology card. She claimed she had been deceived by my father's lies and suggested we meet for lunch to heal the family rift. I took her expensive stationery, dropped it directly into the kitchen trash can, and went back to my day. I set firm, impenetrable boundaries. I changed my phone number. I refused all contact with the people who abused me and the people who stood by and watched it happen. In the South, there is a toxic expectation that blood ties demand endless forgiveness and submission. I learned that you do not owe anyone a seat at your table just because you share a genetic lineage. Protecting my peace required cutting the dead branches away from my family tree. I poured my energy into the earth. I transferred my agricultural consulting business to a remote model, allowing me to live full-time on the estate. I hired a small crew of dedicated local farmers, men and women who respected the land to help me clear the neglect. We spent the winter repairing the cracked irrigation pumps and testing the soil composition. We applied rich fertilizers to the root systems. We pruned the century-old pecan trees, cutting away the rot so the healthy limbs could thrive under the Alabama sun. The physical labor was exhausting, leaving my muscles aching and my hands calloused at the end of every day, but it was the most rewarding work of my life. I was not just restoring an orchard. I was rebuilding my own foundation. Spring arrived, bringing a thick canopy of vibrant green leaves back to the property. On a warm Saturday evening in late May, a sleek black car drove up the dirt lane. Chloe stepped out, looking radiant and unburdened by the toxic weight of the Harris family. Her divorce from Harrison was finalized months ago, executed with the exact same ruthless efficiency she applied to her forensic accounting investigations. She had moved back to Atlanta, launched her own independent financial firm, and secured a roster of high-net-worth clients who valued her uncompromising integrity. We embraced on the front lawn the setting sun, casting a warm glow over the grass. We did not talk about my parents' impending criminal trial or Harrison's miserable apartment. We talked about the future. We carried 2 glasses of iced sweet tea up the wooden steps of the sprawling wraparound porch. I sat in the old wooden rocking chair that used to belong to Grandma Beatrice. Chloe sat across from me on the padded porch swing. The Alabama sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the neat, symmetrical rows of the thriving orchard. A warm evening breeze swept through the trees, carrying the familiar scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine. I reached into a woven basket resting on the side table. I pulled out a fresh pecan harvested from the first successful early yield of the season. I placed the hard shell between the metal jaws of an antique nutcracker and squeezed the handles together. The shell fractured with a sharp, satisfying crack. The sweet, earthy smell of the nut filled the air between us. It was a simple, raw scent, but it represented everything. I handed a piece of the pecan to Chloe, and we sat in companionable silence, listening to the crickets wake up in the tall grass. It was a quiet peace I had earned through fire. I thought about the terrified 18-year-old girl who stood in that cold kitchen 11 years ago, signing away her rights just to keep a roof over her head. I thought about the decade of silence, the calculated waiting, and the ultimate unmasking of the people who were supposed to protect me. Breaking generational cycles is not a peaceful process. It requires tearing down the facade, exposing the rot, and standing firm in the wreckage. Boundaries are not a betrayal of your family. They are the ultimate protection of your own worth. I lost the family I was born into. But sitting on that porch, looking out at the land my grandmother saved for me, I realized something better. I had finally found myself. And that is a deed nobody can ever forge. In the heart of the American South, there is a profound, almost sacred reverence for the family name. It is an idea wrapped in the sweet scent of blooming jasmine warm afternoons on wraparound porches and Sunday dinners where the silver is polished to a blinding shine. But as we unpack the story of Adela Harris, we are forced to look beyond the manicured lawns of Alabama and confront a much darker universal truth about how we raise our children. Her story is not merely a legal thriller about forged deeds and quiet titles. It is a mirror held up to the foundational values of modern parenting, forcing us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we are truly passing down to the next generation. At the core of the Harris family's spectacular downfall was a tragic miscalculation of human worth. Adela's parents spent decades building a sprawling, exhausting facade, prioritizing country club memberships, elite networking, and luxury vehicles over the quiet, unglamorous work of living with integrity. How often do we as parents fall into this exact same trap? In our desperate attempt to give our children the best, or to maintain a pristine image for our peers, we risk teaching them that outward glamour can excuse inner decay. Maintaining a lifestyle built on hidden debt and deceit just to save face is a hollow, temporary victory. When a child is raised to believe that appearances matter more than honesty, the moral foundation of the family begins to rot from the inside out. A person's true value is measured by their character, not by the crest on a tailored blazer or the limits of a black card. Perhaps the most heartbreaking casualty of this distorted value system was Harrison. It is easy to look at the golden child and see only arrogant privilege, but the tragedy of Harrison is a terrifying cautionary tale about the dangers of parental favoritism. In their misguided, desperate attempt to protect him, his parents shielded him from every single consequence of his actions. They covered his gambling debts, justified his failures, and ultimately committed felony crimes to rescue him from his own recklessness. Favoritism is a slow-acting poison. It does not just wound the scapegoated child, it entirely destroys the favored one. Harrison became weak, dependent, and fundamentally broken because he was denied the most crucial lesson a parent can ever impart: accountability. Love is not blindly rescuing your child from the fire they started. Love is handing them a bucket of water and teaching them how to put it out. Contrasted against Harrison's catastrophic entitlement is Adela's quiet, breathtaking resilience. Cast aside by her own blood and threatened with homelessness at 18, she was forced to find her own way. She found it not in the sterile, superficial halls of high society, but in the rich, red Alabama clay. Working as an agricultural consultant, Adela built her life on the undeniable value of genuine labor. She learned to stand on her own 2 feet, finding an unshakable peace and freedom through her calloused hands and her connection to the earth. There is a profound parenting lesson hidden in her survival. The greatest gift we can give our children is not a frictionless, fully funded life, but the emotional and practical tools to navigate a difficult one. Harrison completely collapsed the moment his parents' financial life support was unplugged, while Adela thrived because she understood that true independence is earned, never given. This brings us to the complex concept of family heritage. In traditional American culture, ancestral land and property are often viewed as a bridge between the past and the future. But Adela's parents viewed grandmother Beatrice's 500-acre pecan estate merely as a corporate ATM, a tool to be mortgaged and sold off to commercial developers to salvage their personal mistakes. This is the ultimate betrayal of one's roots. We must teach our children that a family legacy is not a blank check. It is a solemn responsibility. It requires stewardship, respect, and the humbling realization that we do not own the land. We are simply borrowing it from our descendants. As grandmother Beatrice so wisely understood, the roots of the tree are infinitely more important than the decorative branches. Beatrice's foresight is arguably the most profound expression of parental love in this entire saga. She understood the deep flaws of her own children. She knew that the concept of filial piety and family cohesion can easily be twisted into psychological manipulation. To protect her granddaughter, she didn't just offer warm words or hopeful wishes. She utilized ironclad legal tools, embedding anti-coercion clauses into her trust. She teaches us that long-term guidance for our children means preparing for unforeseen storms, even if those storms are generated within our own living rooms. Educating and guiding children requires the vision to protect their fundamental rights against the very human frailties of the people raising them. When Adela was forced to sign away her inheritance on the night of her 18th birthday, her parents abused the sacred power of family trust. They weaponized her gratitude and demanded her obedience. But Adela's eventual triumph reminds us of a vital truth. Establishing healthy boundaries is not an act of betrayal. A truly healthy family structure is built on mutual respect, emotional awareness, and fairness, not unconditional obedience enforced through emotional blackmail. Stories like Adela's remind us that the quiet dynamics within our own homes have the power to shape destinies, build character, or dismantle it entirely. If this reflection resonates with you, and if you find yourself analyzing the unspoken realities and complex relationships within your own life, I invite you to become part of our community. Please follow and subscribe to the channel QT Told Stories for more narratives that explore the deep, often hidden truths of family love and human nature. In the end, family education is not about producing a flawless child to show off to the world. It is about cultivating moral self-reliance. Any empire built on superficial lies will eventually crumble to dust under the weight of the truth. Only genuine values, honesty, fairness, and a willingness to face the consequences of our actions will allow a child to stand firm when the winds of hardship blow. When you look at your own family, past the polished holiday photos and the polite neighborhood chatter, what do you truly see? Are you frantically pruning the branches for the world to admire? Or are you quietly, diligently watering the roots in the dark? We all eventually reap the harvest of the seeds we plant. The only question left is whether that harvest will sustain us or leave us holding nothing but ghosts.